You're surrounded by it right now, in the frame of your chair, the pipes behind your walls, the blood moving through your own veins as you sit here reading this. Iron is everywhere in your life, so ordinary you never think about it. But there was a moment, thousands of years ago, when this metal was rarer and more valuable than gold, and the way your ancestors actually got their hands on it is far stranger than simply digging it out of the ground. Picture the ancient world before iron. Bronze Age civilizations, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the palaces of the Mycenaeans, all built on a technology of copper mixed with tin. Bronze worked well enough. It held an edge, it could be cast into tools and weapons, and entire trade networks spanned thousands of miles just to keep the supply of tin flowing. But bronze had a hidden weakness, one that would eventually bring an entire age crashing down. So how does a civilization skip past that weakness and stumble into the Iron Age? The answer starts somewhere you'd never expect: the sky. Here's the detail that reframes everything. Archaeologists have recovered iron artifacts, beads, blades, ornamental objects from sites dating thousands of years before anyone on Earth knew how to smelt iron ore. And when researchers analyzed the metal in some of these objects, they found something that shouldn't have been possible from an earthly source: unusually high concentrations of nickel, arranged in a distinctive crystalline pattern called a Widmanstätten structure. That pattern only forms one way, inside a meteorite, cooling unbelievably slowly, over millions of years, as it drifted through space. Your ancestors' first iron didn't come from a mine, it fell from the sky. This is where researcher Albert Jambon, a geochemist who has spent years analyzing ancient iron artifacts, comes into the story. Jambon's research team used X-ray fluorescence to test iron objects recovered from sites in Turkey, Egypt, and elsewhere, comparing their chemical signatures directly against known meteorite samples. The results were striking. Multiple ancient iron artifacts, including beads found in a 5,000-year-old Egyptian tomb, matched meteoric iron almost exactly. Ancient Egyptian texts even referred to iron, using a phrase that translates roughly to metal from heaven, a description that turns out to have been literal, not poetic. The Egyptian beads Jambon's team studied weren't even smelted or heavily worked. They'd been cold-hammered directly from meteorite fragments and strung as jewelry, dated to roughly 3,200 BCE, nearly 2,000 years before Egyptians developed any real capacity to smelt iron from ore themselves. Whoever made those beads had almost certainly witnessed, or at least heard vivid accounts of, an actual meteorite fall, then walked out and physically retrieved a piece of it from the desert. That's not casual toolmaking. That's treating a chunk of outer space as sacred material worth tracking down and preserving. Think about what that meant for the people who found it. Meteoric iron doesn't need smelting at all. It arrives already as workable metal, mixed with nickel in a way that actually makes it slightly harder than ordinary iron. Early metalworkers could hammer it, shape it, and forge it using techniques they already understood from working copper and bronze. The problem was supply. Meteorites are, obviously, extraordinarily rare. You can't plan a civilization's tool production around waiting for rocks to fall from space. So for centuries, meteoric iron stayed a luxury material, reserved for kings, ceremonial objects, and burial goods. It was, quite literally, otherworldly, both in origin and in status. Here's where the story takes its real turn. If meteoric iron was too scarce to build an age around, something else had to happen. Someone had to figure out how to pull iron out of ordinary rock. That process is called smelting, and it's brutally difficult compared to bronze. Copper melts at around 1,080 degrees Celsius. Bronze, even lower. Iron ore, by contrast, requires temperatures above 1,500 degrees Celsius just to separate the metal from the rock it's trapped inside. Temperatures that simple open fires can't reach on their own. This is where researcher and archaeometallurgist Vincent Piggott has spent decades studying the earliest iron smelting sites, mostly across Anatolia, in what is now modern Turkey, and the surrounding region historically associated with the Hittite civilization. His work, along with excavations at sites tied to early ironworking, points to a slow, technically demanding breakthrough: the Bloomery furnace, a tall clay chimney packed with alternating layers of charcoal and crushed iron ore, fed continuously by bellows pumping air through the base to drive the temperature high enough. Even then, the result wasn't liquid iron pouring out like bronze from a mold. It was something called a bloom, a spongy, semi-solid lump of iron mixed with slag and impurities, glowing orange, pulled from the furnace with tongs. That bloom then had to be hammered, again and again, while red hot, forcing the impurities out and welding the iron particles together into something usable. It was slow, exhausting, physically brutal work, and for a long time it produced iron that was honestly worse than good bronze. Consider what an early Bloomery furnace actually demanded from a community. Someone had to mine the ore. Someone had to burn enormous quantities of wood down into charcoal, since raw wood alone never burns hot enough. Someone had to work the bellows continuously, hour after hour, keeping the airflow steady enough to sustain a temperature most people never encountered anywhere else in daily life. And at the end of all that labor, the reward was a lump of metal still full of impurities, requiring still more backbreaking hammering before it was worth anything at all. Early iron was, quite genuinely, a technology only a determined and organized society could could sustain. So why did anyone bother? This is the twist that explains everything. Iron ore, unlike tin, is common almost everywhere. You didn't need a fragile trade network spanning a continent to get it. You just needed to dig, locally, and endure the smelting process. And that difference became civilization-altering the moment those long-distance bronze trade networks broke down. Around 1200 BCE, the interconnected Bronze Age world of the Eastern Mediterranean collapsed with startling speed, a period historians still debate the exact causes of, involving climate shifts, mass migrations, and cascading political failures. Tin, imported from sources as far away as modern Afghanistan and Britain, suddenly became difficult or impossible to reliably obtain. Bronze didn't disappear because iron was better. Iron won because bronze's supply chain broke, and iron never needed one in the first place. Blacksmiths who had already been experimenting with the difficult, unglamorous process of smelting local ore suddenly found themselves sitting on the only metal technology that didn't depend on a fragile network of distant trade. Ironworking spread rapidly across the region in the centuries that followed, not because anyone declared a new age had begun, but because it was, very simply, the metal you could actually still get. Archaeologists can actually trace this shift in the ground itself. At sites across the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East, layers dated to just after the Bronze Age collapse show a rapid, unmistakable jump in the ratio of iron objects to bronze ones, appearing within a few generations across a wide, disconnected geographic area. That pattern doesn't look like a single brilliant inventor spreading an idea outward from one point. It looks like dozens of separate communities, all facing the same broken supply chain, independently deciding that the painful iron smelting process their neighbors had been quietly perfecting for years was suddenly worth the trouble. Over generations, smiths also discovered something else almost by accident. Iron repeatedly heated in a charcoal fire absorbed small amounts of carbon into its surface, and that carbon-enriched iron, when quenched rapidly in water, became dramatically harder. They had, without understanding the chemistry behind it, stumbled into the earliest form of steel, centuries before anyone could explain why it worked. Think about the strange symmetry sitting underneath this entire story. The very first iron humans ever held came from beyond the Earth entirely, a gift from space too rare to build anything lasting on. The iron that actually changed history came from the least glamorous place imaginable: ordinary rock, pulled from the ground and beaten into shape through sheer stubborn human effort, over and over, for centuries, until it finally worked. You're surrounded by iron right now. In the frame of your chair, the pipes behind your walls, the blood moving through your own veins as you sit here reading this. It didn't fall from the sky this time. It was dug up, smelted, and hammered into usefulness by people who had no idea they were ending one age and starting another.